The sound of fabric tearing cut through the silence like a gunshot. It was a sharp, final report like a contract signed in blood. Sergeant Eris Thorne stood in the center of the Waypoint Inn, her back a stark canvas under the harsh, sickly yellow glow of the overhead lights. The tattoo sprawled across her bare skin was more than ink. It was a confession, a declaration of war. The Nightshade Squadron insignia, a stylized raven clutching a scythe, was etched above a set of dog tags that declared her a recipient of the Purple Heart. The name, S.G. Eris Thorne. Across from her, slayed the serpent Rourke's knife gleamed in his trembling hand, his face a grotesque mask of arrogance, and now, something else entirely. Fear, primal, unadulterated fear. The air in the Waypoint Inn, usually thick with the scent of stale beer and fried food, hung heavy and metallic with tension. 30 pairs of eyes were locked on the black woman, who had just shattered their entire understanding of power. But to understand why a single tattoo could freeze an entire bar of hardened men, we need to go back 6 months, to the moment Eris Thorne first walked through these doors, carrying secrets that would change everything 0.6 months earlier, a fortress of solitude. The rhythmic scrape of a bar rag against glass was the only sound Eris Thorne permitted herself to make. Her movements were a testament to discipline, controlled precision, a ritual as ingrained as breathing. With every swipe, her eyes swept the room in a meticulous 30-second cycle. First, the 2 exits, noting every detail, every potential obstruction. Then, a check of every hand, looking for concealed weapons or nervous tics. Finally, a quick read of faces, memorizing expressions, cataloging threats. It was a habit burned into her muscle memory from years spent in places where a lapse in vigilance meant certain death. At 34, Eris stood 5 feet 6 inches, her frame slender and deceptively fragile. Most people in the Waypoint mistook her for a civilian, a bartender seeking a simple job. They never noticed the subtle cues that screamed otherwise. The way she instinctively positioned her back to the wall, turning a passive posture into a tactical advantage. The way her fingers, when idly resting on the counter, would find the balance point of every bottle, every ice scoop, every napkin dispenser she touched. She moved with an economy of motion, a quiet efficiency that spoke of purpose, not unfriendliness. Old man Gideon, the bar's 65-year-old owner, watched her from behind the antique register. A Vietnam veteran himself, he recognized the ghosts in her silence, the same ones that haunted his own sleep. He had hired her 6 months ago without asking a single question, understanding that some stories were written not in words, but in scars. He had seen the way her shoulders tensed when a door slammed, the way her eyes would go distant, reliving battles he could only imagine. The Waypoint, and wasn't much to look at. Worn leather stools, scratched wooden tables, and a vintage jukebox that seemed permanently stuck on the same 20 classic rock anthems. But for Eris, the small room above the bar had become her sanctuary, her hiding place from a world that didn't know what to do with its broken warriors. Every night, she jolted awake at exactly 3:17. The phantom weight of her M4 carbine would press against her shoulder, the acrid, metallic tang of burning metal filling her nostrils. In those moments, her hand would instinctively reach for the spot where her rifle sling used to rest, only to find the raised tissue of old shrapnel wounds along her jawline. She'd learned to muffle her screams into her pillow, to time her breathing with the distant drone of highway traffic, until the arid, dusty landscape of Helmand Province faded back into suburban reality. The heat of the summer sun was relentless against the tavern windows, but Eris always wore long sleeves, the fabric a shield hiding the story written across her skin. When she sliced limes for the evening rush, the regulars would often pause their conversations, mesmerized by how she held a blade. Not like a bartender, but like a warrior who had used knives for purposes they did not want to imagine. That girl's got ghosts. Gideon had once confided in his wife, Eleanor. Eleanor had simply nodded, knowing some ghosts wore uniforms and carried dog tags. The arrival of the Vipers. Every Friday at 2000 hours, the low rumble of Harley-Davidson engines would shake the very foundation of the Waypoint Inn. It was a ritual of intimidation, a signal that conversations would die mid-sentence. Couples would suddenly remember urgent appointments, and even the most intoxicated patrons would sober up enough to settle their tabs and leave. The Iron Vipers Motorcycle Club, a gang notorious for their cruelty and control, had owned Friday nights for the past 3 years. Their reign began the moment their leader, Slade the Serpent Rourke, decided Old Man Gideon's bar would pay for protection it never asked for. Gideon would count out $500 in worn 20s, placing in a battered envelope he kept ready, like a diabetic with their insulin. Eris observed this ritual from behind the bar, her jaw tight, but her hands steady. She had learned a brutal lesson in her years of service. Sometimes, survival meant choosing which battles not to fight. Last week, that resolve had been tested to its limit. Eris had been taking out the trash when she heard the screams from 2 blocks over. She saw Slade's boot connect with Mr. Hahn's ribs again and again, while his crew, including his right-hand man, Hammer Jackson, laughed and filmed it on their phones. Her body had coiled like a spring, muscle memory screaming for her to intervene. But she'd forced herself to turn away, to remember why she couldn't afford to be noticed. The guilt of that moment had burrowed deep, another scar to add to her collection. It was a familiar, suffocating feeling, the same guilt that haunted her dreams of Hellman. The sound of the motorcycles grew louder now, a mechanized thunder rolling closer. Eris felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the hypervigilance that had kept her alive in hostile territory. Her hands, which had been so steady moments before, began to tremble as she arranged bottles on the shelf. Gideon's weathered fingers trembled as he prepared the envelope. Their eyes met across the room, 2 soldiers from different wars recognizing the same crushing weight in each other's shoulders. Tonight, something was different. The air tasted metallic, like blood and ammunition, and her instinct screamed warning she had learned never to ignore. The hypervigilance wasn't a burden tonight. It was a promise. What was about to happen would shatter 6 months of carefully constructed invisibility. But Eris didn't know that yet. All she knew was that her hands had stopped shaking, and that felt like a very dangerous thing indeed. .8 motorcycles, their chrome pipes spitting defiance at the quiet suburban night, roared into the parking lot. Slade Rourke dismounted first, a hulking presence of sculpted hatred wrapped in worn leather and denim. His arms were covered in tattoos that told stories of violence earned, not inked. He kicked open a waypoint and door hard enough to splinter the frame, savoring the silence that followed as conversations died and eyes dropped to study fascinatingly dull drink surfaces. Behind him, Hammer Jackson and 4 other Iron Vipers formed a wall of intimidation. Their presence transformed the cozy bar into a cage. Slade's scarred knuckles cracked as he flexed them, a sound like breaking bones that made Gideon flinch from across the room. Well, Gideon. Slade's voice carried the kind of casual cruelty that came from never facing consequences. He grabbed a chair and flipped it backward, straddling it like a throne, his eyes sweeping the room with predatory satisfaction. Business looks good tonight. Real good, which means you've been holding out on me, old man. Gideon's hands shook as he pushed the envelope across the bar. $500 that might as well have been blood money. That's everything we agreed on, Slade. Same as always. But Slade wasn't interested in agreements tonight. He was interested in power, in the sweet taste of fear that flavored every interaction. Agreements change, Gideon. Economy's tough. My boys need more. 800 months, starting now. The words hung in the air like a noose tightening around Gideon's throat. Slade, please? I can't afford it. The slap came fast and hard, Slade's open palm connecting with Gideon's cheek with a sickening thud, snapping the old man's head sideways. Hammer Jackson laughed, a sound like grinding gears, while the other biker spread the bar like an infection, deliberately knocking over drinks and stepping on fallen napkins with muddy boots. Slade grabbed a full beer from a nearby table and poured it slowly onto the floor, his eyes never leaving Gideon's face. "Clean that up," he said. But his gaze had found Eris, who had stepped forward with a bar towel. "Well, hello there. Didn't know Gideon kept pets." Eris moved with careful precision, kneeling to soak up the spilled beer while positioning her body between Slade and Gideon. Her movements were too smooth, too calculated, and Slade noticed. "What's your name, girl?" The slur he'd almost used hung unspoken, but present, poised in the air between them. Eris didn't respond, just continued cleaning. Her silence wasn't submission, it was strategy. Slade's boot pressed down on her hand, pinning it to the floor. I asked you a question. You deaf as well as dumb. Still, Eris said nothing, though the tendons in her neck stood out like steel cables under tension. Gideon tried to stand, blood trickling from his split lip. Her name's Eris. She just works here, Slade. Leave her out of this. What makes a person with elite military training so dangerous? Their ability to wait, to endure, to choose the perfect moment to strike. But Slade Rourke had never faced a real warrior. Only civilians too scared to fight back. Eris. Slade rolled the name around his mouth like cheap whiskey. Pretty name for Gideon's Black. The slur landed like a grenade, but Eris's only reaction was a slight tightening of her jaw. She stood slowly, towel in hand, and met Slade's eyes with stillness that made Hammer Jackson shift uncomfortably. "Ooh, this one's got some spine," Slade grinned, his teeth like broken tombstones. "I like that. Makes it more fun when they break." He shoved Gideon again, harder this time, sending the old man crashing into the shelf behind the bar. Glass shattered, whiskey mixed with blood on the floor, and something shifted in Eris's posture. Subtle, but definitive. A safety being switched off. That's not how you solve problems. Her voice cut through the chaos with military precision. Each word was measured and controlled. The entire bar froze. Slade's face went through a series of expressions. Surprise, amusement, and then a volcanic rage. Did this? Just tell me how to run my business." Hammer and the others formed a tighter circle, their hands drifting toward concealed weapons. Eris didn't move, didn't blink. She just held Slade's stare with the kind of calm that comes from facing death and finding it wanting. I said, Slade stood, his full height looming over her. "Do you know who I am?" What happened next to transform the Waypoint Inn from a sleepy suburban bar into a battleground, where true strength will be measured not in muscles or numbers, but in the courage to stand when everyone else kneels. Slade Rourke charged like a bull, 220 pounds of rage aimed at the black woman who dared challenge his authority. Eris sidestepped at the last microsecond, using his momentum to send him crashing into a table that exploded into splinters. The other biker surged forward, but stopped when Eris grabbed a broken bottle, holding it with the practiced grip of someone who had wielded worse weapons in darker places. "Stay back," she commanded, and something in her voice, that bone-deep, quiet authority, made even Hammer hesitate. Slade scrambled to his feet, his face purple with humiliation, and lunged again. This time, Eris didn't dodge. She met him head-on, her smaller frame somehow absorbing his impact, redirecting his force with techniques that didn't belong in any street fight. Her elbow found his solar plexus. Her knee drove into his thigh's nerve cluster. And suddenly, the bigger man was gasping, off balance, confused. "You little—" Slade's hands found purchase on Eris's shirt, fingers digging into the fabric as they grappled. Eris twisted, trying to break free, but Slade's grip was iron. The sound of tearing cotton split the air like a gunshot. Time slowed to a crawl as Eris's shirt gave way, revealing the canvas of her back to the harsh tavern lights. The tattoo sprawled across her dark skin like a declaration of war. The distinctive Nightshade Squadron insignia, a stylized raven with wings spread and a single scythe clutched in its talons, surrounded by intricate military imagery of a lightning bolt and a trident. Below it, in stark, permanent lettering, SGD Eris Thorne, Purple Heart recipient, Operation Enduring Freedom, 2019 to 2022. And a pair of detailed dog tags were inked at the base, with never forgotten etched beneath them. The artwork was beautiful and terrible, professional military tattoo work that told a story of service, sacrifice, and survival. The bar fell silent as a grave. 30 people collectively held their breath, processing what they were seeing. Even the jukebox seemed to pause between songs, as if paying its respect to a living legend. Slade's hands dropped to his sides, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. Hammer Jackson, who'd done 2 tours in Iraq before turning to a life of crime, recognized the insignia immediately. His face went pale beneath his beard. Holy hell," someone whispered. "She's Nightshade." The words rippled through the crowd like an electric shock. Nightshade Squadron, the Army's most elite, most classified special operations unit. Warriors so secret, most of their missions would never be known. And not just any Nightshade operator, but a Purple Heart recipient. She had bled for her country, and here she was, serving drinks in a rundown tavern. But Slade Rourke had built his reputation on never backing down. His pride wouldn't let him process what he was seeing. His confusion curdled into something uglier, mockery born from fear. "Oh, this is rich," he sneered, though his voice cracked slightly. "Gideon's got himself a broken toy soldier. What's wrong, sweetheart? Still hearing the bombs in your head?" He circled her now like a hyena testing wounded prey. "Purple Heart, huh? That means you got hurt. Means you failed." Eris stood motionless, her exposed back straight, hands loose at her sides. But her breathing had changed, become shallow and rapid. "How many of your squad came home in boxes because you weren't good enough?" Slade pressed, sensing weakness. "Do you see their faces when you close your eyes? Do their families know you're hiding in this hole instead of? How many times can a warrior's heart break before it becomes unbreakable?" Eris had asked herself that question every night for 2 years. And now, she finally had her answer. The flashback hit like an IED. Sudden, violent, undeniable. She was back in Helmand Province, the taste of dust and cordite filling her mouth. The explosion had flipped their MRAP like a toy, and Specialist Ramirez was screaming, his leg gone below the knee. She dragged him to cover while taking fire, her shoulder blooming with pain where shrapnel found gaps in her armor. "Stay with me, Ramirez. Stay with me." But there were too many wounded, not enough hands, and the medevac was taking fire. She had made choices that night, decisions about who to save first, and those choices had followed her home like ghosts. Her hands shook now, that familiar tremor that meant her PTSD was winning. Slade saw it and smiled, thinking it found her breaking point. "There it is," he crooned. "The crazy showing through. What are you going to do, hero? Cry, run away like you ran from?" But Eris wasn't running. She was transforming. The shaking stopped as suddenly as it had started, replaced by something else. A stillness that preceded violence the way lightning preceded thunder. "You know nothing about sacrifice," she said, her voice carrying the weight of every flag-draped coffin she had saluted. "You know nothing about carrying the weight of other people's lives in your hands, about making impossible choices in impossible situations." She turned to face him fully, no longer hiding, no longer shamed. "You want to know what this tattoo means? It means I've been hell and back. It means I've paid prices you can't imagine for freedoms you don't deserve." The crowd stirred, understanding dawning like sunrise after the longest night. Gideon pulled himself upright, blood still on his chin, but pride in his eyes. "That's enough, Slade." An older man in the corner spoke up. He was a Marine veteran from Desert Storm. "You're talking to a goddamn hero." Others found their voices, their courage. "She served our country while you were selling meth to teenagers," a woman added. Hammer Jackson looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight as his worldview cracked. But Slade's rage had nowhere to go but forward. His hand went to his belt, and suddenly there was a knife in his fist. 6 inches of serrated steel that had ended arguments before. "I don't give a damn what uniform she wore," he snarled. "In here, I'm the only authority that matters." The knife flashed toward Eris's throat, but her hands moved faster. Muscle memory forged in life-or-death seconds half a world away. She deflected Slade's wrist with her left forearm, while her right hand snaked around, finding the pressure point that made his fingers spasm open. The knife clattered to the floor as Eris continued the motion, using Slade's own momentum to flip him over her hip in a textbook throw that would have made her combative's instructor proud. Slade hit the floor hard enough to drive the air from his lungs. And before he could recover, Eris had him in a control hold, not the brutal choke he deserved, but the measured restraint of a professional. "I don't want to hurt anyone," she said, her knee pressing into his spine just enough to keep him immobilized. "But I will protect those I care about. That's what soldiers do." The transformation in the room was electric, like watching people wake from a collective nightmare. Hammer Jackson stepped forward, but not to help Slade. Instead, he kicked the fallen knife further away. "Stay down, Rex," he said quietly. "You've lost." Other patrons found their courage in Eris's example. The Marine veteran from the corner stood. Then another, then a young woman whose brother was serving overseas. Soon, 30 people were on their feet, forming protective wall between Eris and the remaining Iron Vipers. "This is our bar," Gideon said, his voice stronger than it had been in years. "And she's one of us." The bikers looked at each other, confused and outnumbered, their usual intimidation tactics useless against a community that had found its spine. Slade struggled against Eris's hold, spitting curses, but she maintained control with minimal force, enough to restrain, not enough to injure. The police arrived in force. Someone had called during the fight, and Detective Elena Reyes entered with her uniformed officers, her hand on her service weapon. She'd been building a case against the Iron Vipers for 18 months, but witnesses always recanted, too scared to testify. Tonight was different. He pulled a knife on her. Gideon said immediately, "We all saw it." The chorus of agreement was overwhelming. "He's been extorting businesses for years," the Marine veteran added. $500 a month from Gideon, more from others. Hammer Jackson stepped forward, and Slade's eyes widened in betrayal. "I'm done with this," Hammer announced. "Detective Reyes, I'll tell you everything. The drug deals, the protection racket, where we keep the books, all of it." The silence that followed was deafening. "You damn rat." Slade wheezed from the floor, but Hammer just shook his head. "I followed you because I thought you were strong. But her—" He gestured at Eris, who was helping Gideon to a chair. "She showed me what real strength looks like. It's not about hurting people weaker than you. It's about protecting them, even when it costs you everything." 2 other Vipers nodded, stepping away from their bikes. "We're out, too." Detective Reyes' body camera captured everything as witnesses gave statements. The security footage from Gideon's system showed Slade's assault, the knife attack, and Eris's measured response. Combined with hate crime charges for the racial slurs, Slade was looking at serious time. His family's money might buy good lawyers, but it couldn't erase video evidence or 30 witnesses with matching stories. The story exploded across social media within hours. "Female Nightshade veteran defends bar from racist biker" went viral, shared by military groups, women's organizations, and civil rights advocates. News crews appeared the next morning, but Eris wasn't hiding anymore. She stood in front of the waypoint and wearing a tank top, her tattoo visible for the world to see, and spoke her truth into the microphones. "For 6 months, I tried to hide who I was, thinking my scars made me weak. But real strength isn't about hiding. It's about standing up for what's right, even when your hands shake." The interview clip was viewed 10 million times in 3 days. Donations poured in for the Waypoint Inn. Veterans organizations reached out. Eris had become something she never expected, a symbol of resilience. But whose life changes most when the truth comes to light? Sometimes it's not who you'd expect. 3 months later, Slade Rourke sat in federal prison. His empire crumbled. His family had disowned him. The Iron Vipers had disbanded, their members either arrested or scattered. Hammer Jackson had opened an auto shop that exclusively hired veterans, giving second chances to those who had served. But the biggest transformation happened at the Waypoint Inn. What had been a rundown bar became a gathering place for veterans dealing with PTSD. Eris led weekly support groups, sharing her story to help others confront their demons. "I thought I was protecting myself by hiding," she told the group one Thursday night. "But isolation isn't safety. It's just another kind of prison." Gideon had recovered fully, and he'd legally made Eris a partner in the bar. Together, they created something beautiful from something broken. The ripple effect spread beyond their small town. Eris's story inspired other veterans to seek help instead of hiding. Female veterans especially reached out, saying her visibility helped them feel less alone. She testified before a congressional committee about the unique challenges facing women veterans. She consulted with the VA about improving PTSD treatment programs. But most importantly, she kept tending bar at the Waypoint Inn, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply show up, scars and all. "Every time I put on this tank top and show my tattoo," she told a documentary filmmaker, "I'm telling every struggling veteran that it's okay to be wounded. It's okay to need help. What's not okay is giving up." Her phone buzzed constantly now. Veterans in crisis, media requests, speaking engagements, but she always made time for broken warriors who found their way to the Waypoint's door. 6 months had passed since the night that changed everything. And Eris Thorne stood behind the bar at the Waypoint Inn, but she was unrecognizable from the woman who'd hidden in long sleeves and silence. She wore a black tank top that displayed her Nightshade Squadron tattoo with pride, her movements confident as she mixed drinks with a Thursday night crowd. The bar itself had transformed, too. New paint, upgraded furniture, and a wall of honor displaying photos of local veterans. Gideon worked alongside her, their partnership official now, treating her like the daughter he'd never had. The regular crowd had evolved from drinkers seeking escape to a community seeking connection. Veterans, their families, and supporters filled tables where thugs once counted extortion money. Eris smiled, a genuine, joyful smile, as she served a group of female veterans who'd driven 2 hours just to meet her. The bell above the door chimed, and a young Asian woman entered, her movement speaking of military bearing despite civilian clothes. She stood frozen in the doorway, scanning exits and counting occupants, habits Eris recognized intimately. The woman was maybe 25, with the 1,000-yard stare that came from seeing too much too young. She approached the bar with the careful steps of someone navigating a minefield, her hands visible, non-threatening. "Excuse me." Her voice barely carried over the classic rock playing softly. "Are you Sergeant Thorne?" Eris set down the glass she was polishing, giving the woman her full attention. "I am, and you don't have to call me Sergeant anymore. Just Eris." The relief that flooded the younger woman's face was heartbreaking. "I'm Lana Han, Army medic. Just got back from Aleppo 2 months ago." Lana's story spilled out in fragments. The convoy ambush, the soldiers she couldn't save, the nightmares that made her afraid to sleep. "I saw your story online," she said, tears threatening. "My dad, Mr. Han, sent me the article. I've been sitting in my car outside for an hour, trying to get the courage to come in." Eris came around the bar, guiding Lana to a quiet corner booth. 6 months ago, I was hiding from my own shadow," Eris said, sitting across from her. "I thought my scars made me weak, that showing the men I'd failed somehow." She rolled up her sleeve, revealing shrapnel scars along her forearm. "But these aren't signs of failure. They're proof of battle survived." Lana traced her own hidden scars unconsciously. "I can't stop seeing their faces, the ones who didn't make it." Eris reached across the table, warrior to warrior. "They never leave us, but we honor them by living, by helping others who are fighting the same battles." Gideon appeared with 2 cups of coffee. He always knew when a conversation needed caffeine more than alcohol. The old veteran nodded at Lana with understanding before returning to the bar. "You know what I learned?" Eris continued. "Strength isn't about hiding wounds. It's about sharing them so others know they're not alone." She gestured around the bar, where several groups were deep in conversation. Half these people are veterans or family members. "We've created something here, a place where you don't have to pretend you're okay." Lana's shoulders relaxed slightly. "My family doesn't understand. They want the old me back, but she died in that desert." Eris's response carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. "You can't go back, but you can go forward. And you don't have to do it alone. Have you ever wondered if sharing your darkest moments could become your greatest strength?" Eris Thorne had discovered that answer, and now she was passing it on. The transformation of the Waypoint had caught national attention. What started as one woman's refusal to let a bully win had evolved into a movement. They now hosted weekly support groups, job fairs for veterans, and family counseling sessions. The model was being replicated in 12 other cities, with Eris consulting via video calls. Hammer Jackson often stopped by, his own auto shop thriving with 15 veteran employees. "You saved my life that night," he told Eris once. "Not from Slade, but from what I was becoming." Even some former Iron Vipers members had found redemption through community service. But the most profound changes were in the small moments. Veterans learning to sleep without nightmares, families reconnecting, survivors becoming mentors. Detective Elena Reyes entered the bar, but not on official business anymore. She had become a regular, part of the extended family that the Waypoint had created. "Eris, I've got news," she announced, unable to contain her smile. The Department of Veterans Affairs approved the grant. The Waypoint model is going national. The bar erupted in cheers. Eris felt Gideon's weather hand on her shoulder, steady and proud. From one small act of courage, Reyes continued, you've created a nationwide movement. They want you as a national coordinator. Lana, who had been listening intently, looked at Eris with awe. You did all this? Eris shook her head. We all did this. Every person who stands up instead of hiding, who shares their story instead of suffering alone, they're all part of it. The celebration was interrupted by Eris's phone buzzing. She glanced at the screen, a number from Washington, D.C. Eris Thorne, this is Congresswoman Vivian Croft. We'd like you to testify before the Armed Services Committee about improving veteran mental health services. Eris's hand trembled slightly. Old habits die hard, but her voice was steady. I'll be there. As she hung up, Gideon raised a toast to Eris Thorne, who showed us that real strength comes from facing our demons, not running from them. Glasses raised throughout the bar, but Eris's mind was already moving forward. There were thousands of veterans still hiding, still suffering in silence. Her war wasn't over. It had just changed battlefields. 6 weeks later, Eris stood before Congress, her tattoo visible beneath her professional blazer. Every day, 22 veterans take their own lives, she testified. Not because they're weak, but because they're fighting alone. We can change that. Her words carried the authority of lived experience. Behind her sat Gideon, Lana, Hammer, and a dozen other veterans whose lives had been transformed. The committee listened with rare attention as Eris outlined a national program based on the Waypoint in safe spaces and communities where veterans already gathered. We don't need more studies or statistics. We need connection, understanding, and the courage to show our scars. The proposal passed unanimously. As Eris flew back home, she thought about the journey from that night. Slade tore her shirt to this moment. The woman who'd hidden in long sleeves was gone, replaced by someone who understood that vulnerability could be the ultimate strength. The Waypoint still needed her on Thursday nights, and that mattered as much as any congressional testimony. Because change happened one person at a time, one story at a time, one moment of courage building on another. Lana now co-led support groups, paying forward what she'd received. New faces appeared every week, men and women carrying invisible wounds, searching for hope. And they found in the most unlikely place, a suburban bar where a woman's tattoo had one stop time. The final image was perfect in its simplicity. Eris behind the bar, tattoo visible, surrounded by people she'd helped who were now helping others. Above the door, a new sign, the Waypoint in Veterans Welcome, safe space. No one fights alone. Because sometimes the most powerful revolutions begin not with armies or governments, but with one person refusing to hide their truth. Eris's phone buzzed again. Another veteran in crisis. Another opportunity to turn pain into purpose. She answered without hesitation. This is Eris. You're not alone. Let's talk. The cycle continued. Each act of courage creating ripples that would touch lives for generations. True strength, she had learned, wasn't in the battles you won, but in the warriors you helped find their way.